So I will begin now with our next session, which focuses appropriately enough on professional ethics and professionalism in neuroscience. And we'll hear first from Dr. Nicholas Steneck, who is the Director of Research Ethics and Integrity Program of the Michigan Institute for Clinical and Health Research and Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Michigan. Dr. Steneck chaired the University of Michigan's Task Force on Integrity and Scholarship and Public Health Service Advisory Committee on Research Integrity. He helped establish and recently directed the Office of Research Integrity and the National Institutes of Health Research on Research Integrity Program, and has published many articles on topics including important topics, including the history of research misconduct policy, responsible conduct of research instruction, and the role of values in university research. Dr. Steneck is also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read my remarks so I get through, hopefully, in the 10 minutes that I've got. I appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning to discuss what characterizes a virtuous scientist and the factors that have been shown to influence researchers' ethical behavior. Before turning to this topic, let me clarify the focus of my remarks. Scientific research raises difficult ethical questions. The issues I am interested in and have been working with for over 30 years do not involve moral disagreement. There is widespread agreement that scientists should be honest and avoid practices such as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. The fact remains that some scientists are not honest and do misbehave, raising two questions. Why do scientists still misbehave, and what can be done to foster higher standards for the responsible conduct of research? The principles set out in codes of ethics identify the virtues that should guide scientists. The international code that I am most familiar with and helped to develop, the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity, begins with four principles: honesty, accountability, professional courtesy and fairness, good stewardship in research. There are more fundamental virtues underlying each of these principles, but as a basic starting point, statements of principles provide a reasonable summary of the attributes of a virtuous scientist. For the day-to-day administration of science, however, scientists work more in a duty-based than virtue-based world. The Singapore Statement summarizes these duties under 14 responsibilities. In other contexts, the duties of scientists are formalized as guidelines, policies, rules, and regulations. Professional scientists have a duty to meet the standards set by their profession or field of study. Research on research integrity confirms that scientists do not always live up to their responsibilities. The frequency of misbehavior varies with perceived seriousness. Studies suggest that at least one in every 100 scientists over the last few years engaged in behaviors their colleagues regarded as seriously wrong. The frequency of lesser misbehavior ranges anywhere from a few percent to a high of 50%, or 1 in every 2 researchers. Putting these two categories of misbehavior together, the overall behavior curve for science follows a normal distribution with low numbers but not insignificant numbers at the extremes and unacceptably high numbers in the middle. The cost of misbehavior in science is significant. One study put the price of a single misconduct investigation at over $500,000. Cleaning up after misconduct is also expensive, such as the cost of retracting the dozens of articles involved in some misconduct cases. 2 researchers in Europe recently alleged that the use of fraudulent research and clinical recommendations for surgery could have led to 800,000 unnecessary deaths over the last decade. Another study of equipoise in cancer clinical trials suggested that overly optimistic pretrial estimates of efficacy could render nearly a third of all trials worthless. Money down the drain, so to speak. Misbehavior in research is an economic as well as a moral issue. Why do researchers misbehave in these ways? 30 years ago, when it was widely believed that research misconduct was extremely rare, the few bad apples theory was widely offered as the best explanation. In response, Policymakers established a definition of bad apples, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, and put in place procedures for bringing allegations, conducting investigations, and reaching conclusions. A decade later, when the evolving misconduct policies failed to rein in the problems of research misconduct, researchers and policymakers turned to a lack of proper training as the next best explanation. This led to new requirements for training and a dramatic increase in responsible conduct of research courses and materials. A decade after that, when better training failed to stem the continued trickle of new cases, attention turned to research on research behavior, encouraged by journal editors and a small grant program established by the Office of Research Integrity. Some of the new findings about factors that contribute to misconduct and misbehavior include the following. Workplace conditions make a difference. Researchers work in a strained and unjust environments are more likely to engage in irresponsible practices. Researchers are not good at evaluating their own behavior. They tend to believe that they are more faithful to the accepted norms of science than their colleagues. Some researchers are not good mentors. In a review of confirmed cases of research misconduct, ORI reported that 71% of mentors had not reviewed the raw data, 47% had not set standards for responsible research. Self-regulation in science has significant shortcomings. Scientists seem to report suspected misconduct. Large numbers of flawed publications slip through the peer review process. Some are not retracted when the flaws are discovered. These are examples, not an exhaustive list of findings. They are designed to suggest that there are many explanations for irresponsible behavior in science and considerable room for improvement. Most of the solutions to the problems identified are generic to science and therefore difficult to solve within the context of a specific funding program, such as the BRAIN Initiative. But programs such as this can set examples. I will end with two suggestions and one final caution. Training. The U.S. requirements for RCR training are largely unfunded. Mandates. PHS and NSF have supported RCR resource development and a few training-related research projects, but the fact remains that the cost of delivering integrity training rests on research institutions and faculty. This has resulted in heavy reliance on general, low-cost, modest-effort online training programs and the volunteered or required effort of faculty, many of whom are not up to date on responsible research practices. It would be instructive to see what could be accomplished if the BRAIN Initiative could at least include opportunity and perhaps a requirement to develop field-specific efforts to foster responsible conduct of research as a part of the overall research program and not as simply a general RCR training as now required. Second, best practices. Provide field-specific RCR training is hindered by the fact that many areas of research, including the neurosciences, have not developed detailed guidelines for responsible practice. Some effort to improve standards and best practice as part of the BAIN initiative could promote sharing, improve peer review, reduce waste, and perhaps even prevent some irresponsible practices. For both suggestions, my primary interest in raising awareness and promoting understanding is focused on duty. I am aware of the fact that additional ethics training might help scientists understand why virtue in and of itself is important and act more responsibly in the process. Personally, I feel, however, that the clarification of duty is more important. The caution I would like to end with stems from the troubling fact that much of science today seems to be driven by duty, not by duty or virtue, but by utilitarian ethic, or what some have called market science. This is true of all science, but there is evidence that some special programs, such as the BRAIN Initiative, create unique market forces that negatively impact the integrity of science. Scientists sometimes resort to unrealistic expectations to get their programs moved to the head of the funding queue. Irrelevant research can be spun in ways that make it seem irrelevant. There is evidence that project-based science can encourage mediocre science and a loss of sense of truth, creating what one research team called, with particular reference to the neurosciences, bubble science. None of this bodes well for the integrity of research. Research misconduct does seem to follow the slippery slope principle. Stepping on the slope of minor misconduct is a significant risk factor for going on to commit major misconduct. If focused initiatives increase the pressure that inclines some researchers to engage in irresponsible practices, then it would seem these initiatives should include additional measures to promote integrity in research. I have suggested 2 such measures, but there are many more that could be explored during the discussion. Thank you for the invitation to present and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steneck.